This is The Opinions, a show that brings you a mix of voices from New York Times Opinion. You've heard the news. Here's what to make of it.
If I had to sum up Donald Trump's second term in one word, that word would be cut. USAID, cut. Department of Education, cut. Thousands of federal jobs, cut. With so much breaking news, it's hard to stop and fully document the impact of all these cuts. But then in April, I heard about one that made me pause. The Trump administration cut about $1 billion in funding for a program that Trump's own party had pushed for. How did this happen? That's the story I'm going to tell you today. The rise and fall of a program Republicans championed just 3 years ago. A program funded through a rare bipartisan agreement. And how, in 2025, no Republicans who fought for it seem to care that it's being gutted. The law that created this program came together after a tragedy.
Can you tell me a little bit about where you were and what you were thinking when you heard about the Uvalde shooting?
I was actually presiding over the Senate.
On May 24th, 2022, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, was at work.
I was sitting in the Senate president's chair when on my phone I started to see notices of a school shooting in Uvalde, Texas.
We're coming on the air with breaking news of a shooting at an elementary school.
At least 19 children were killed and 2 adults at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde.
We're going to take you right to Texas, where many parents spent the night waiting for word on whether their children survived.
For me, when any of these school shootings happen, but certainly when Uvalde happened, the first thing I started thinking about was, my friends in Sandy Hook, the parents that I'm now so close to. And I know that every time another one of these school shootings appears on the news, they have to relive the horror of that day. I went through some of that day with them. I was at the emergency response site as the parents were told that their kids were dead. But of course, I was just an interloper. Uvalde looked so familiar. The scenes outside of the school, the parents waiting around to hear about their children. And so I knew it was going to be even harder for the parents in Sandy Hook.
Murphy has become a major advocate for gun control. On the day of the Uvalde shooting, he took his politics to the Senate floor.
I came down from the dais and I went straight to my desk in the Senate. I'd written down just a few words on a piece of paper while I was sitting there.
Senator Chris Murphy is speaking on the Senate floor. Let's listen.
What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority? If your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing. What are we doing?
A couple of my Republican colleagues heard that speech, and within almost hours, we were off and running on a negotiation, the first really substantive one in 30 years.
Senator Murphy got a bipartisan group together, lawmakers ready to take action to prevent school shootings. Most of the Democrats were for stringent gun control measures, like an assault rifle ban. Republicans quickly coalesced around mental health treatment.
Republicans had always said that this gun violence epidemic is not a question of guns, it's a question of mental health. And it was clear that if Republicans were going to get in a room and have a conversation with me about what I wanted, changes to our gun laws, then we were going to have to talk about what they wanted to talk about, which is mental health reform, mental health investment as a mechanism to reduce violence.
You can hear that in interviews Republicans gave as they tried to negotiate this bill back in 2022. Here's Senator John Cornyn, a Republican from Texas, where Uvalde happened.
People who do have mental health problems, we want to make sure they have access to mental health care. This young man in Uvalde was literally circling down the drain from a psychological standpoint, and obviously not only took the lives of others, he took his own life in the process. And we'd like to try to find some way to intervene to stop that before it occurs again.
In the the end, Murphy's bipartisan group created a bill that would address gun laws and mental health. It got a lot of Republican support. Even Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate minority leader, fought for the bill.
Democrats came our way and agreed to advance some common sense solutions without rolling back rights for law-abiding citizens. The result is a product I'm proud to support.
This bill was a big deal. It enacted the first new federal restrictions on guns in nearly 30 years. And it included about $1 billion in school-based mental health programs. School-based because, as one researcher told me, kids are 6 times more likely to go to therapy when it's offered in school rather than in the community. The program also invested in universities to train new social workers to address shortages in the field. President Biden signed the bill into law on June 25, 2022. Across the country, in Hope, Arkansas, a school administrator was watching.
I was very excited because it was something that both sides said, as a nation, we've got to address this. My name is Phoebe Bailey, and I'm director of Southwest Arkansas Education Cooperative in Hope.
I want to get to the federal grant program, but I wanted to ask you first, the grant program came about because of legislation that passed after the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. I'm curious if you remember hearing about that incident. And yeah, it sounds like yes.
So yeah. And then, it brought back memories. When I was still in the classroom, we had a shooting in my district.
Oh my God.
No one was killed, but we had 2 students that were injured. And I taught the shooter. And I would have never picked Colt out as the shooter. He wasn't causing me problems. He wasn't hanging from the ceiling. He wasn't beating up kids. He wasn't stealing, all the things that the quote-unquote bad kids do. But he didn't have friends. He was very withdrawn. And those were signs that as a young teacher, I had no idea I was supposed to look for. So anytime that there's a school shooting, my mind always goes back to that day. And like I said, we were just lucky that we only had injuries, but just the sounds and the screams.
So you were in school when that happened?
Mm-hmm.
Phoebe left the classroom in 2000. As an administrator, she now spends her days supporting teachers for the 11,000 kids in her area. Some of these students have a lot of needs. About 1/5 of the people in Phoebe's region live below the poverty line. In any given year, there are a lot of students in her area who could really use help with mental health, but that was especially true when the post-Uvalde legislation passed, in the wake of the COVID pandemic. So, Phoebe applied for one of the school-based mental health grants. It was administered through the Department of Education. Can you remember the feeling of getting the grant?
Like the best Christmas gift ever.
Her region got about $4 million over 5 years. And with all that money, Phoebe hired 7 counselors and therapists to do one-on-one and group therapy with students. They also help schools put together safety plans, and they help with threat assessments.
Like if someone said, so-and-so said he has a hit list, so-and-so said he wants to kill himself, what is the procedure and the steps?
The therapy program has been incredibly popular, even with parents.
Parents show up with their kids and say, I need help. I hear that somewhere in this building there's somebody that can talk with my kids. And every spring, I'm like, you guys cannot take on anybody else. You're killing yourself. You're going to burn out. You don't. But the need, they just do whatever the need is.
The counselors she hired are also there to help when there's a crisis, like in the first year Phoebe had the grant.
There were 2 cousins that were being raised by grandparents. Still to this day, it just depends on who you ask. They either were playing around and one accidentally shot the other, or that one was angry with the other. I don't know, but there was a shooting and one passed away.
Each boy had his own group of friends.
You have the factions of your friend did this on purpose. He meant to kill his cousin. And then that group of friends are saying, no, it was an accident. They were both defending the memory and or the honor of the boys. I mean, there was literally a time I was down there with a team working on a different project, and you hear this big commotion in the hall, and that's what it was. So I'm out there calling my team saying, okay, we need to get down here. We need to do more. We need to get them back in groups.
What did they do in those groups?
Initially, it was handled like a grief group because for some of them, it may be the first person their age that they've lost. So giving them coping skills, talking through the grief process. It's okay to be angry. But then as it evolved and continued throughout that year, more, how do you handle it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we said it was okay to get angry, but you can't get stuck there. We can process and brainstorm on not just how do we act or react when someone dies, but when anything causes that anger emotion, what do we do with it? How do we work through it? How do we not get stuck in the depression, in the anger, in the whatever the emotion was?
Yeah, I mean, those sound like great skills for the rest of their lives, not just...
Exactly. That's what we're hoping.
Yeah.
Right.
This grant has made a huge difference in the schools under Phoebe's supervision. Teachers can focus on teaching rather than on student mental health. Classrooms are calmer. There are fewer fights in the hallways, fewer suspensions. One school that started out with an F in accountability, based on graduation rates, attendance, and test scores, rose to a C. Earlier this spring, Phoebe was getting ready to hire an 8th counselor. She had just started advertising in the local paper when she got an unexpected letter.
When I opened it, I read it, and then I reread it and could not make myself really comprehend that this was truly where we were going. And it was just an email.
The letter told Phoebe her funding for school mental health would end on December 31st, 2025. Phoebe is desperately searching for other funding. But for now, it looks like the 7 counselors Phoebe has hired will be out of a job in the new year, and her students will lose all that support and expertise. Phoebe sent me this letter. So did some other districts. They're all nearly identical. The letter says that the original grant included funding for programs that conflict with the Trump administration's priorities. In what way? It lists a couple of reasons. It says the programs violate federal civil rights law and, quote, conflict with the department's policy of prioritizing merit. I talked to more than a dozen school administrators in states across the country for this story, and most of them thought the cancellation stemmed from one small part of the grant proposal. Do you remember what the grant application said about diversity?
There's a section in there, and it just talks about looking for diverse staff, just to increase the diversity of your providers. When we wrote the grant, we just wanted to mirror our area, mirror our community.
Mm-hmm.
But by that same token, when we advertise, there's nothing in our ads at all that say, this round we're trying to be more diverse. Only, I truly do not know the race of the people until they show up at the interview. But we have 1 African American, 2 Hispanics, and the rest are Caucasian. And that mirrors our demographics. Probably, if we were actually going to go totally by the demographics, we'd need more African Americans. But, what I need are people that can help the kids.
Right.
And I think the part that bothered me the most was that the letter was like we were trying to break some civil rights law. I mean, if you don't like that piece of the grant that says have a more diverse staff, take that one little section out.
I talked to the Department of Education about this. A spokesperson was unhappy with me for describing these grants as canceled. These grants, she told me, were, quote, non-continued. What's the difference? Well, she said, the Department of Education plans to recompete the grants, so this money will be made available again. Schools can reapply under new Trump-approved priorities. She told me that these priorities would be, quote, more aligned with resolving students' mental health and not divisive or ideological slants. But calling this a non-continuation seems like a euphemism. As of January 1st, for a lot of schools, this government funding will no longer exist. Whether or not the administration lets schools reapply for the grants under different criteria is beside the point. This funding has been canceled, and it is unclear when these grants will actually be recompeted. I asked Senator Murphy what he made of this.
They're not going to repurpose this money. This money's gone. It's gone.
Have you heard from any of your Republican colleagues on this?
Yeah, sure. I don't talk about those conversations publicly, but I've talked to some of my Republicans who voted for this bill who, don't understand what Trump has done, but, by and large are not willing to say it publicly.
I did my own search for Republicans who had worked on this bill to see if anyone would speak with me. I reached out to Senator Collins, Senator Tillis, Senator Cornyn, 10 in all. Only the former U.S. Senator from Missouri, Roy Blunt, agreed to see me. He left the Senate in 2023, and he's now a lobbyist in downtown D.C.
Hi, Senator. How are you? Yeah. Okay, nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Senator Blunt did a lot of work on mental health while he was in office, and he saw mental health as key to stopping school shootings.
And the thing you could do, in my view, that would create the most school safety would be handle these significant behavioral health issues that even young kids in the social media environment, the post-COVID environment have as part of their background.
I'm curious if you remember in the negotiation over what would be in the bipartisan act, how this particular program became part of the bill.
Well, I think there were a lot of people that wanted to be sure that there was a school focus. And frankly, I think that school focus turned out to be one of the pilot ideas. And the problem with pilots is that they are pilots. And, often the government will have a pilot and it'll go for 2 or 3 years. And you can say, okay, the pilot was successful. We know that works. Which really the message to the Congress is, now if you want to do that for everybody, you can do it for everybody, but the pilot is over.
Nowhere in this legislation was this funding called a pilot. While this program was time limited, it was supposed to run for 5 years. Congress funded it for a full 5 years. The Trump administration cut it off after 3. I told Senator Blunt what a problem this was for Phoebe's region. I've been talking to one school in particular in Arkansas, and they were able to hire, I think, 7 counselors for 11,000 kids. They oversee 9 school districts, so it's a lot of kids. And they're going to have to cut it off in December now because of the cancellation. So what would you say to them? What do you think they should do now?
Well, I don't know what you pay. Would you say 7 counselors in total of 9 districts? Less than 1 counselor per district? You sometimes you just have to decide what your priorities are. That doesn't sound like a mountain that you couldn't possibly climb if you wanted to. So, the federal government can't solve every problem.
I wanted to see what Phoebe would make of this, so I played this clip for her.
So, the federal government can't solve every problem.
Your expression says a lot right now.
Yes, I don't have a poker face. It's easy to say, oh yeah, 7 people, that wouldn't be that much money until you understand education funding. Okay, But you're talking 7 highly trained people that are making around $70,000. So you add benefits. It would take probably almost $100,000 per person for a year.
$100,000 per counselor, $700,000 in total.
Yeah, $700,000. Maybe Missouri has more school funding than we do. I need to check that out, but that's a big pot of money.
Yeah.
And that's just 1 year. It's an ongoing commitment. He's in Missouri. He's not that far. Come down, see my kids, see what they're going through, talk to my schools, talk to my principals, to my teachers, and let them tell you what this is doing. Then talk to my superintendents and tell me where we're going to get the money. I mean, do I think that we've had wasteful spending? Sure I do. There are definitely things that we need to cut, but not at the risk of our future. And that's what these kids are. And getting them healthy will help prevent the next Uvalde.
In the cancellation letter Phoebe got, the Department of Education said she could appeal their decision within 30 days. Phoebe submitted an appeal on May 15th and hasn't heard anything back. There is one way this funding could be restored. The courts could step in. I talked to a Georgetown law professor about this. He told me that this cut is illegal. School districts could come together and challenge the White House in court. But many of these districts are dependent on the Trump administration for other funding. Would they really want to put that in jeopardy by joining a lawsuit? Case in point, I reached out to dozens of school administrators for this story. A lot of them wouldn't even talk to me because they're so worried about retribution from the White House. That means it's up to Congress to speak out. Back in 2022, after Uvalde, Republicans said, "We want to treat mental health, not restrict access to guns. That will prevent school shootings. That will save lives." They mostly got their way. Now, not one Republican senator is speaking out to save this program. The story of this funding cut is the story of the GOP in Donald Trump's second term. We are watching the legislature surrender its most important purpose. It's giving up its power over funding. The Republican Party will not stop this administration from cutting whatever they want, whenever they want, from whoever they want. Even from one of the reddest states in the country. Even the funding they fought so hard for just 3 years ago.
If you like this show, follow it on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Opinions is produced by Derek Arthur, Vishaka Darba, Christina Samuelewski, and Jillian Weinberger. It's edited by Kari Pitkin and Allison Bruzik. Engineering, mixing, and original music by Isaac Jones, Sonia Herrero, Pat McCusker, Carol Saburo, and Afim Shapiro. Additional music by Aman Sahota. The fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta and Christina Samuelewski. The director of Times Opinion Audio is Annie Rose Strasser.